Last week, the S&P 500 closed at another all-time high. Most headlines stopped there. We didn't because while the index celebrated a record, the market underneath it was already changing. Semiconductor stocks, the sector that had powered much of this rally, fell sharply. Money began rotating elsewhere. The headline said new highs. The market whispered something very different. And that's where real investing begins. Welcome to What Changed, the podcast from VYNG. I am Vikas. If this is your first time listening, here is one thing to know about us. We don't try to tell you everything, we tell you what changed. Every day, thousands of financial headlines compete for your attention. Inflation, interest rates, AI, oil, earnings, geopolitics. Someone says buy, someone else says sell. By the end of the day, there is more information, but not necessarily more understanding. That's the problem. Because markets don't reward the people who consume the most news, they reward the people who recognize when something has fundamentally changed. A stock price by itself isn't information. A job report by itself isn't information. Even an all time high isn't information. Information lives in the difference, the gap between expectation and reality, the gap between last quarter and this quarter, the gap between what everyone believed yesterday and what the market believes today. That's the delta. And every episode of this show asks one simple question: what changed? At Wing, every piece of research follows the same philosophy. First, identify the change. Second, explain why it happened. Third, decide whether it actually matters. Because not every headline deserves your attention. Some changes disappear within hours, others reshape markets for years. Our job is to help you tell the difference. That also means we have a few rules. First one, every important figure is sourced and verified. If a number comes directly from a company, we will tell you. If it's an estimate, we will tell you. And if credible sources disagree, we will tell you that too. Trust isn't built by sounding certain, it's built by being transparent. Second one, no urgency theater. Markets create enough excitement on their own. We don't need to manufacture it. If a story can't survive careful verification, it doesn't deserve your investment decisions. And finally, no clutter. These episodes are intentionally short, 5 to 10 minutes. One idea, one takeaway, then you are back to your day. So, what does this actually sound like? Let's use last week's market as an example. The headline was very simple: stocks reached a new all time highs. But the more interesting story wasn't the price, it was the reaction. A weaker than expected jobs report would normally pressure equities. Instead, markets rallied. That's the change. The market is beginning to interpret weak economic data differently than it did just months ago. The reaction became more important than the number itself. Then came another shift. Leadership started rotating. Capital moved away from parts of the AI trade and into other sectors. Is that enough evidence to call a lasting trend? Not yet. Which is why at Wing, we don't just explain the evidence, we measure our confidence in it. Every major story receives a conviction score, not a buy recommendation, not a sell recommendation, simply an honest assessment of how strong the evidence is today. Think of it as probability, not prediction, because investing isn't about certainty. It's about making better decisions with incomplete information. Here's what every episode of What Changed will deliver. The first, what changed? Second, why did it change? Third, does it matter? Fourth, how confident are we? And finally, what should investors watch next? That's it. No endless panels, no shouting, no sensational headlines, just the signal behind the noise. If you would like to explore the data behind each episode, every podcast is paired with a full report at VYNG.io. You will find the charts, the sources, the before and after comparisons, and the reasoning behind every conviction score. The podcast gives you the signal, the report gives you the evidence. One final thought before we go: the best investors don't know everything, they simply notice what others overlook. Markets don't move because news exists. Markets move because expectations change. And that's exactly what we will be tracking here. I am Vikas. This is What Changed, presented by VYNG, because clarity compounds. Thanks for listening.